The fork hit the table harder than Nora meant it to. The clatter cut through Celeste Mercer's laughter and Victor's muttering about interest rates. And for 1 second, every eye at the table landed on her. Nora didn't flinch. She simply folded her hands and looked at her husband, waiting. Daniel didn't notice the shift in the room. He was too busy finishing his rant. Another contract gone. Do you understand what that means? $40 million gone, because nobody at this table can see 2 steps ahead. Maybe, Nora said quietly. It's the short-term borrowing. You're using new loans to cover old debt instead of fixing what's actually broken. That's not bad luck. That's a structural problem. The table went silent for a different reason this time. Daniel turned to her slowly, a smirk pulling at his mouth like he'd been waiting all night for an excuse. Structural problem. He laughed sharp and short. Since when do you know anything about corporate debt? You balance a checkbook, Nora. You don't run a company. Daniel, she started. No, let her finish, Celeste said, delighted, swirling her wine. I'd love to hear the analysis. Nora felt her face flush, but she kept her voice even. I read. I pay attention. That doesn't make me stupid. That was when Daniel leaned back in his chair, and something ugly settled into his expression, something that had been building for months and finally found its moment. You want to talk about paying attention? Pay attention to yourself sometime. You're a pathetic, overweight nobody who should be grateful anyone married you at all. Don't sit here and pretend you understand things that are far beyond you. The silence that followed had weight. Victor stared at his plate. Celeste's smile faltered, just slightly, like even she hadn't expected that much venom. Nora didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She set her napkin down beside her plate, folded it once, and looked at her husband the way a person looks at a stranger they've just decided to stop being polite to. Are you finished? Daniel blinked. Excuse me? I asked if you're finished. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, which made it worse. Because I want to make sure you've said everything you need to say. I don't want you thinking later that there was more. He laughed again, uneasy now. What is wrong with you tonight? Nora stood, pushed her chair in, and smoothed the front of her blouse. Nothing's wrong with me, Daniel. For the first time in a long time, something's finally right. She paused at the doorway, just long enough for the words to land. Good, because after tonight, things are going to be very different. She left them staring after her, Celeste already whispering something to Victor, Daniel sitting there with his mouth slightly open, no idea that 3 hours earlier her attorney had sent her a single text message. The acquisition has officially closed. Daniel Mercer had no idea what he had just insulted. What Daniel didn't know, what nobody in that dining room knew, was that Nora hadn't married into poverty pretending to be comfortable. She had married into wealth pretending to be poor. Her mother, Nora Whitaker, had built the Verones Group from a single trading firm into a multinational empire worth billions. And when she died, she left it all to her only daughter, along with a warning that had shaped every decision Nora made since. Money makes people perform love, her mother had written. It rarely makes them feel it. If you want to know who truly loves you, you have to disappear behind a version of yourself that has nothing to offer. So Nora disappeared. She created a private identity, NW Holdings, and ran her investments through a wall of lawyers and shell structures so clean that even her husband believed she worked a modest administrative job at a mid-sized firm. No luxury cars, no designer labels, no mansion. She drove a 7-year-old sedan and clipped coupons out of habit, not necessity, because for years she'd told herself she needed to know the truth about the man she loved. At first, the truth had been kind. Daniel had been attentive, funny, ambitious in a way that felt inspiring instead of exhausting. But ambition curdles when it isn't fed. And somewhere in the last 2 years, Daniel had started needing more than Nora, modest, quiet, unglamorous Nora, could give him. He grew embarrassed by her secondhand coat. He started correcting her in public. He stopped asking what she thought about anything that mattered. And then came Sabrina Cole. Nora found the first message by accident, a notification lighting up Daniel's phone while he was in the shower. She hadn't gone looking, but once she saw it, she couldn't stop looking. Messages that lingered too long after midnight. A hotel receipt tucked into his coat pocket from a night he said he'd been stuck at the office. A photograph, blurry but unmistakable, that a friend had sent her without knowing what it would do. She hadn't confronted him, not yet. She had simply started paying closer attention to Daniel and to the company that consumed every waking thought he had left for her. Mercer Dynamics had once been a name that meant something. Victor Mercer built it from a garage operation into a mid-size manufacturing and tech firm that employed 1,200 people across 3 states. But somewhere in the last 5 years, the company had started rotting from the inside, and nobody in the family seemed willing to say why. Nora, watching quietly through her investment network, had started to understand. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't the economy. Mercer Dynamics had been taking out new loans to cover old debt for years, hiding the severity of its situation behind vague earnings calls and confident press releases. Daniel and Victor both knew, and both had kept pretending the next contract would fix everything. Her advisors were blunt about it. "The company can be saved," one of them told her over a secure call. "But not under the current leadership. Whoever's running it now is either incompetent or lying. And either way, it's dying." Nora sat with that information for 3 days before she called Adrian Shaw. Adrian had been her attorney since her mother's death, one of exactly 2 people on Earth who knew who NW really was. He listened without interrupting as she explained what she wanted. "Buy it," she said. "All of it? Enough that they can't make another decision without me." There was a pause on the line. "Nora, this is your husband's family." "I'm aware. Is this about the company, or is this about something else?" Nora looked out the window of her small apartment, the one Daniel thought was her sister's, the one she disappeared to when she needed to think. "It's about both," she said. "But mostly, it's about the fact that I'm done being invisible in my own life." The acquisition took 6 weeks to structure quietly. Distressed debt, purchased through 3 separate holding entities, so nothing traced directly back to NW Fractional. Share buys from panicked investors looking to exit before the company collapsed entirely. By the time it was finished, NW Holdings controlled Mercer Dynamics outright. Nora told no one, not Daniel, not Victor, not even her closest friends. She wanted to watch what happened next. The morning after the dinner, Daniel acted as though nothing had happened, which told Nora everything she needed to know about how many times he'd said cruel things and expected them to be forgotten by breakfast. "You embarrassed me last night," he said, buttering his toast without looking at her. "No," Nora said. "You embarrassed yourself. I just happened to be sitting there." He set the knife down, agitated now that she wasn't apologizing on schedule. "You know what? If you're going to be like this, maybe we should just—" "Then file," Nora said. Daniel actually laughed, the sound brittle. "File? File for divorce? Over dinner?" "Over years," Nora said. "The dinner was just the part where you finally said it out loud." He stared at her, waiting for the moment to crack, for her to backpedal the way she always had. It didn't come. Nora picked up her coffee, took a sip, and walked out of the kitchen like the conversation had already ended, because for her, it had. That afternoon she met Adrian in his office downtown, the one with the frosted glass door that said nothing about who his real clients were. 3 things, she told him. Prepare divorce proceedings. Prepare Daniel's termination from Mercer Dynamics, effective the moment we make the acquisition public. And begin a forensic investigation into the company's finances. Everything going back 5 years. Adrian studied her for a long moment. "You're certain about this?" "I've spent years making sure everyone else was comfortable," Nora said. "I'm done." He nodded slowly, then hesitated, the way he did when he had information he didn't want to be the one delivering. "There's something else you should know. Sabrina Cole isn't just Daniel's affair. Our forensic team flagged her name on several internal transfers. She's been helping him move money in ways that don't match any legitimate business purpose." Nora felt something in her chest go very still and very cold. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was structural, deliberate, and it had a name attached to every layer of it. "Show me everything," she said. "I want to know exactly what he's done before I walk into that boardroom." The announcement landed on a Tuesday morning. Mercer Dynamics had a new controlling owner. Victor found out from his own general counsel, and by the time he reached Daniel's office, his face was the color of old paper. "Someone bought us out from under us," Victor said. "Some holding company, NW Holdings. Do you know anything about this?" Daniel didn't. He assumed, like everyone else, that some faceless investment firm had circled a wounded company and moved in for the kill. "Whoever bought this thing doesn't understand what they're dealing with," he told the board that afternoon, arms crossed, trying to sound like a man still in control of something. The boardroom doors opened at exactly 2:00. Nora walked in. For a moment, nobody moved. Victor's mouth opened slightly. Celeste, seated near the window, actually gasped. Daniel stood halfway out of his chair, confusion written across every line of his face. "Nora, what are you doing here?" She didn't answer him right away. She walked the length of the table, unhurried, and set a folder down at the head of it, the seat that had always belonged to Victor, and before that, to no one who had ever expected her to sit there. "Taking my seat," she said. "Security," Victor barked, already reaching for the phone on the table. "Get her out of here." Before anyone could move, the doors opened again, and Adrian Shaw walked in with a leather folder of his own. He didn't sit. He simply began speaking in the calm, procedural voice of a man who had done this 100 times. NW Holdings acquired controlling interest in Mercer Dynamics 6 weeks ago through a series of debt and equity purchases. All documentation is here for the board's review. He placed the papers on the table. As of this morning, NW Holdings is the sole controlling shareholder of this company. Daniel's face had gone pale. "Who owns NW Holdings?" Nora looked at him, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to soften anything for his comfort. "I do." The room went completely silent. "You really never wondered what the N stood for?" she asked quietly. "Nora Whitaker. It was never a secret, Daniel. You just never asked." Daniel's voice cracked when he finally spoke again. "This isn't real. You don't have that kind of money. You work in an office. You drive a—" He stopped himself, hearing how absurd it sounded even as he said it. "I drive a 7-year-old sedan because I wanted to know if you loved me or the life you assumed I could give you," Nora said. "You made your answer very clear last night at dinner." Victor turned toward his son slowly, something dawning in his expression that had nothing to do with the acquisition. "Wait, you're saying our daughter-in-law is—" "The heir to the Verones Group," Adrian confirmed, "among other holdings." Nora nodded to Adrian, and he laid out the second folder, the forensic report. Concealed debt, fraudulent expense filings, suspicious transfers routed through accounts connected to Sabrina Cole. 2 years of decisions that had nothing to do with bad luck and everything to do with Daniel and Victor hiding the truth from their own board. Victor's hands were shaking as he flipped through the pages. "You knew about this?" he asked his son, his voice dropping into something dangerous. "You knew, and you let me stand in front of investors and lie?" "Dad, I can explain. You were sleeping with Sabrina while this company was collapsing." Victor's voice cracked on the word collapsing. Daniel turned to Nora, desperation replacing arrogance for the first time in years. "Nora, please. We're married. Whatever's happened, we can fix this. Just don't do this in front of everyone." "Don't explain," Nora said, and her voice, though quiet, cut through the room like a blade. "You've spent years explaining why everything was my fault. My clothes, my weight, my silence. You don't get to explain your way out of this one. I'm asking you to forgive me. We're still married." "Exactly," Nora said. "And I finally understand what that marriage was worth to you." She slid the final document across the table. His termination, effective immediately, stripped of his role, his office, and any claim to the company he had assumed would one day be his. Nora didn't tear the company apart out of spite. She rebuilt it. Within the month, She'd removed the executives responsible for the years of financial concealment, protected the employees who had been blamed for failures they never caused, and brought in leadership that actually understood transparency instead of fearing it. She renegotiated the company's crushing debt herself, sitting across from lenders who had no idea the quiet woman across the table had been underestimated her entire adult life. At her first company-wide meeting as CEO, employees expected someone cold, someone ruthless enough to buy a collapsing company out from under a family. Instead, Nora stood in front of them and said simply, "I didn't buy this company because I wanted another trophy. I bought it because I knew it could be better, and because I was done watching people who worked hard get blamed for the mistakes of people who didn't." That night, alone in the apartment that was finally entirely hers, Nora opened the letter her mother had left her years ago, the one she read every time she needed reminding why she'd built the life she had. "Wealth is not power," her mother had written. "The courage to decide what happens next. That is power." Nora folded the letter and looked out through the glass wall of her new office at the city lights below. Daniel was gone. The Mercer family no longer had any hold over her life, her name, or her time, and for the first time in years, she wasn't hiding from anyone. The woman they once called a nobody had never been powerless. She had simply been waiting until she was ready to stop asking permission to become herself. If you were Nora, would you have exposed Daniel in that boardroom, or walked away silently and started over? Tell us in the comments below. And if this story kept you hooked, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story of betrayal, hidden power, and unforgettable comebacks.